All right, welcome to part 2 of the floating combat text tutorial. So in the last one, we got it set up so that you could just do some sort of damage to the other player. Nothing fancy, but just so we have something to test with. So in this part, we'll start setting up the actual floating text. So let's go into the content browser. And if you don't know the shortcut key for that in Unreal Engine 5, it's just Control Space. We'll toggle that up and down. And so let's go into here and make a new folder, and we'll call this floating combat text. And then the first thing we're going to need is a widget that we're going to use to show above the player's head. So let's open this up and right click and go to user interfaces and select widget blueprint. And then we'll call this the floating combat text underscore widget. And then let's go ahead and start working on this guy first, because this should be pretty easy. So I'm just going to dock him up here at the top. And then the first thing we want to do is we want to add the actual text that's going to pop up. So we can come over here on the left and we can actually delete this canvas panel because we don't need it. And then search for text up here and then drag in a text like so. And then I'm going to change the thing up here to be desired, and that's just going to show it at the actual desired size. And then we can just adjust this as we needed. So let's set is variable up here to true, because we're going to need this to be a variable. And let's just rename this to display text. And then we also want to change the color, or maybe not the color. Well, you could change the color, but we want to change the size of it so that it's a little bit bigger. So let's see here. Let's go down to font. And then for the font family, I think I only have this one. Oh no, I have some others. Well, you can set this to whatever you want. Doesn't really matter. I'll use this Roboto, or no, we'll use this one, I guess. Doesn't really matter. I like this one. And then we'll just do light. And then for the size, you can play with this number. I ended up using something like 32. And then it also helps if you add some outline. So if you search for outline here, set this to something like 2. And then I personally think it looks better if the outline color is a little bit more gray. So I'm going to do 0.05 for all of these, because black is a little bit, the contrast is a little bit much when you actually see it in the game. Okay, so here we got our text. And I'm also just going to change it to 100, just so we can see what it looks like as a number. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to add an animation to this, because if you remember from my other project, whenever it pops up, I'll just show you again real quick. So this is the other project. Whenever the numbers pop up, you can see they start out pretty big, and then they quickly scale down, so they kind of pop, and then they also go up, and then they also fade out. So we want to do all that here in this little animation window on the left. So let's just move this over. So I'm going to hit this little plus button to add a new animation, and then for the name, I'll call it float up. And then let's click on this guy. And the first thing we want to do is the render opacity, so making it fade out. So the way you do that is you hit track right here, and then you select all named widgets, and I believe you hit display text. And then that will add the display text to the animation. And then we want to add a new track for it. And then you can select whatever you want to change about it. So we want to change the render opacity, so I'm going to go ahead and do that one. And then we want it to start out with 1 render opacity. So it's already set to 1, but if you set it again and then press enter, it'll actually add a keynode for it. Or at least I think it did. Maybe it didn't. We'll see. So if we drag this over here, sometimes this animation thing is a little tricky to get it exactly how you want. I've never quite figured out the controls, to be honest. But if we drag it over to 0.25 and then we type in 0.9 here, then you can see it creates the 2 nodes. So it goes from 1 render opacity to 0.9. Maybe we could even go like 0.8. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. We want to do it on this guy, 0.8. So that way, this is when it first comes in. It's going to be full opacity, and then it's going to go down to 0.8. So that way, the newest number is the one that's the most opaque. And then after 1 second, we'll start fading it out. So we need to put 0.8 here again, And we're just doing that so that it doesn't change between these two nodes. And then to get it to start fading out, we'll say at 0.5, it's going to be fully faded out. So we'll set 0 here. So now if we hit this play button, you can see what happens. It starts out fully opaque, and then it quickly goes to 0.8 opacity, and then it slowly fades to fully transparent. Okay, and then the next thing we want to do is, let's see here, is the translation. So we want to move it up. So to do that, let's drag this guy back here to the beginning, and then let's go to track and search for transform. And then under this, we want to add translation to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit this drop down here, and we only want to change the Y value because that's the up and down. And I'm going to press 0 here and press enter, and then move this guy all the way to the end. And then for this, I'm going to put, I think, -70 is what I used before. And so now if we drag this back to the left, you can see as it goes, or as the timeline goes, it continues, it goes from down low to up top. It kind of moves up. It also adds, I don't know exactly why it does this, but it also adds nodes here for like the rotation and the scale and stuff. We don't really need those. I don't think they hurt anything, but I just deleted them because we really only care about the Y here. Maybe I can give me room. There we go. So you really only need it on the Y here. And again, if you press play, you'll see it goes up nicely. One thing I changed on my other one is that this is actually using a curve to transform it up. And I just want it to be linear. So if you click on both of these, you can do that by control clicking. And then you right click. I think that works at least. Let's see. No, maybe that doesn't work. So actually you might have to hit this little show animation keys and curve editor, and then select the translation, and that will show you the curve it's using. So we can change it here. So if you select both of these and then right click, you can set it to linear, and that'll make it a linear movement as it goes up. So now if you play it, it's totally linear. And that's at least just the way I wanted it. And then the last thing we need to do for this is the scale. So we want it to kind of pop in. So we want the scale to start larger and then scale down. So to do that on the scale, we will say 1 and 1 right there, which you already have. And then we'll move it over to 0.25, which is the same time we have it switch to 0.8 opacity. And we'll set the scale to 0.5 on the X and the Y. And it looks like it didn't get this one. So we need to come back here and make sure that it starts out at 1. So we should have 2 dots here at 1 and 2 dots here at 0.5. And then we don't need to do anything after that. So this is our full animation. So if we press play, you can see exactly what's happening. So it kind of pops in, moves up, and then fades out. And then one other thing we're going to do while we're here is I'm going to make another animation, and we're just going to actually duplicate this one. And this is just for debugging purposes. I'll show you later why this one is helpful. But let's just duplicate this one and call it debug. And then let's click on that one. And then all we want to do here is we want to remove this guy because we don't want it to go invisible. So click on this last one here, make sure you're on float up debug and just delete it. And then you'll see now if you play the animation, it doesn't disappear. And that's because at some point we're gonna set it up so that they don't actually disappear, just so you can see what's going on. If you don't care about any of that, then you can skip this, but I just think it's a little useful thing to do, just kind of see what's going on. But anyways, now we can go back to the graph tab. And then inside of here, we want to basically set it up so that when this widget gets spawned, it goes ahead and plays that animation. So we actually just delete these. I don't think we need any of these. And the first thing we want to do is we want to add a new custom event. So we'll right click and say add custom event, and we'll call it initialize. So this event is actually going to get called from C++, and it's going to get called right before this widget spawns. And so it's going to be responsible for setting anything about the widget that it needs to know about before it actually creates itself. So in this case, that's going to be the text. So let's add an input here and make it of type text. And then we'll just rename it to text. And then what we want to do is we want to take our display text over here. If you don't see this over here, that's probably because you forgot to set this guy to a variable, and you want to make sure it's named display text. But anyways, let's drag that in, say get, and then say set text. and we want this guy set text, and we'll just go ahead and set to that. So all that's doing is when this initialize event gets called, we're setting this text, this 100, to be whatever whatever text gets passed into this function. All right, and then the next thing is we want to override the event on initialized. So we'll say on initialized. Make sure you get event on initialized. So I know it's a little bit confusing because we have initialized and on initialized, but initialized is our custom function that we wrote. Event on initialized is something that the engine calls for us when the widget is created. So this is actually going to get called, I'll just put a little note here, called before the widget is spawned, just so we know. So this is the first thing that happens, and then this is the second thing that happens down here. And so what we want to do inside of here is we want to play this animation. So we're going to drag in our float up, which is our animation, and then we'll say play animation, and we'll hook it up, put it there. And then, is there anything else we need to do? Oh yeah, one other thing we need to do is we want to know when this animation stops playing. So actually, before we play it, let's just drag this over here. We also want to say, we also want to bind to it so that we know when it finishes. So I'm going to make a little reroute node here by double clicking, drag off of this, and say bind to animation finished. And then we'll hook this up first. And then I'm just going to add a little reroute node here just so we're not going through nodes. And then for this guy, we can drag off of it and say create event. And then we will select our event down here. Now we don't actually have one yet, so we'll just say go ahead and create a matching function for us, like so. And so this is going to get called whenever that float up animation finishes. So we'll come up here and F2 to rename, and we'll call it on and finished. And then we can set this guy to private so nobody else can call it. And then what we want to do inside of here, inside of this widget, is we just want to dispatch an event to let the person who spawned this widget know that this widget has finished floating up and finished animating. Because at that point, the person who spawned this widget is going to want to destroy it, right? Because once it's fully transparent and it's fully faded out, we can just go ahead and destroy it. But we can't do that from here, so we're going to make an event dispatcher, and then we're just going to dispatch that event and say, hey, we finished animating, go ahead and do whatever you need to do. So over here on the left, under event dispatchers, let's hit this plus button, and we'll just call this on and finished. Oh, we already got a name for that. We'll just call it and finished, and then drag this guy in and say call, and hook this up. So now back here in our event graph, just to recap, oh, it looks like this didn't quite figure out what to do. So make sure this guy is set to on and finished. So we're basically saying when the animation finishes playing, when this float up animation finishes playing, go ahead and call whatever event is inside of here. And you can see we have on and finished. So it's going to go ahead and call this guy, and it's going to dispatch this event. Okay, so this is everything we need to do for this class, I believe. So the next step is to actually set it up so that back in our player, if we open up our player, so inside of this handle damage or handle radial damage, we actually want to essentially spawn that widget on top of the player's head. So let me think what the best step for next would be. Let me look at my other project real quick, because we need to start doing some C++ here in a second. And we need to create the component for this as well. Let's go ahead and let's make the actor first that holds this widget. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out the best way to do this so we can like see progress as we go along. Oops, sorry, that's my other project. Didn't mean to open that over there. All right, so let's go back here. And okay, so in Unreal Engine 4, to create a C++ class, I think it's under File, and there's a new C++ class option. But for Unreal Engine 5, they moved it to Tools for some reason. But we want to create a new C++ class, so we're going to do this. And then we want it to be of type actor. So go ahead and hit next. And then for the name of it, we're going to call it floating text actor. So this is going to be the actor that holds that widget that we just created. And this actor is going to get spawned above the player's head whenever text needs to show up. So go ahead and just create this. And then when you do this, if this is the first C++ class that you've created for this project, which if you're following the tutorial, then it will be, then it's going to create a new Visual Studio solution or whatever IDE you have set up by default in Unreal Engine. And it's going to give us a new solution, and then we'll have to reopen the project using that solution. If you've never used, or if you don't have Visual Studio installed, and well, then this obviously isn't going to work. But if you go to my YouTube channel, there's a video for getting started with Unreal Engine and Visual Studios that you could check out if you've never done that before. But this tutorial pretty much needs to be done in C++ just because of some of the functionality to it. So that's why we're doing it in C++. So this might take a minute. I'll probably just edit this part out and come back to it. All right, so as you can see, it has gone ahead and created a new Visual Studio solution for us. And it's gone ahead and created this floating text actor. So if we look over here under source, under my project, we have our floating text actor.h and .cpp. So let's go ahead, first of all, and relaunch Visual Studios relaunch Unreal so that it's connected or attached to Visual Studio. So if you go back to your project, just go ahead and do a file, save all real quick, and then we can just close it because we want to relaunch it so that it's attached to Visual Studio. So up here at the top left, we want to change this to debug game editor, and that will make it so that we can use breakpoints and stuff inside of Visual Studios to debug what's going on. And then we can just go ahead and hit this green little local Windows debugger button at the top, and that will actually relaunch the project through Visual Studio. All right, so now we got Unreal Engine open again, and you can see we can play it and everything works just fine, but we're now connected to Visual Studios. And the way you can tell that is if you go back to the Visual Studio project, now at the top here, there's this red stop debugging button, and that means it's currently debugging Unreal Engine, and so you know it's running. So let's go ahead and start setting up this actor. So this one's going to be pretty straightforward because we're actually going to be doing the majority of it in blueprints. This is going to be the parent class to our child blueprint. So we just want to add a couple things here. The first thing we want to add is a new function called initialize, which it's going to work very similar to the initialize we had in the widget, where it's just going to be setting the text ahead of time. So to make a function in C++, you need to use the macro called uFunction. And we want to tell it that this is actually a blueprint implementable event. And what that means is that this function is actually going to be implemented in blueprints, not in C++. So to do that, we're going to type blueprint implementable event. And then we can add a category here. And I normally just name the category whatever the name of the class is. So I'll just call this floating text actor. And we'll add a little comment here. Say initializes the actor with required starting information. And then below this, we can add the actual function signature. So we'll say void initialize. And then we want this to take in a text. So we'll say const f text by reference and text. Now you can also pass in something here like the color if you wanted to. So you could change the color of it. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to do the text, keep things simple. And then the other thing we want to add here is the anchor location. And what that is going to be is basically where the location of the text originally started from. So it's going to be the location above its head where it initially spawned. And we'll need this later whenever we're doing the calculations. So let's just come down here and add an F vector, and we'll call it the anchor location. And again, I'll just add a little comment. Oh, actually, this can be private. So we'll make this private first, and then we'll say the location to which the text is anchored. And that looks good. So sometimes Unreal gives you little squiggly lines whenever you're typing, and that's just because it takes a second to update the IntelliSense. But go ahead and make sure that you have all of this spelled correctly, especially this blueprint implementable event. Otherwise, it won't work. And then the next thing we want to do here is we want to add an accessor for this. So let's make one more function in here. And this one can actually be inline. And so we'll say inline, which that just means it's not going to be defined in the CPP. We're going to define it right here in the .h in a second. So we'll say inline, and it's going to return this anchor point. So we'll say it returns a constant f vector by reference, and it's going to be called get anchor location, and it's constant. And then we can just do open curly brace, return, and then we want to return this anchor location. So return anchor location, and then make sure you have a semicolon, and then we're good. So we'll just make a little note here. It's the anchor location. Pretty straightforward. Okay, and then we want to set this anchor location in the CPP file during the begin play. So if we come back here to our CPP now, in begin play, we want to, right below this guy, we want to say anchor location equals get actor location. So all this is doing is it's saving the initial spawn location of the actor, because again, once we spawn these things, we're actually going to move them up. I'll show you that again, just so you can kind of see what's going on, because it's probably not evident the first time you watch it. This is my other project. Again, I think, is it? Yeah. Or, no, it's not. That's the wrong one. This one is my other project. So if you actually pay close attention here, you'll notice that when a new number spawns, it actually pushes all the other numbers that are above it up to make room for it. So you can see as it spawns new numbers, it's pushing all the other ones up like they're in a stack, right? So in order to actually have that functionality, we need to keep track of the anchor point, which is why we're doing that. Okay. So I think that is all we need to do for this class. Let me just double check. Yeah, I think that's good. So now at this point, we can compile this to make sure we did everything correctly. So if we go back to our project and we hit this little, so this is something that they changed in Unreal Engine 5. Unreal Engine 5, the button is down here. It's this little tiny button, which took me like 15 hours to find, but it compiles the C++ code. In Unreal Engine 4, it's somewhere up here at the top, and it kind of looks similar to this. And I think it even has the word compile on it. It should be really easy to find. It's a pretty big button. But anyways, you just hit compile, and then it should give you success. If it doesn't, then you're going to have to look at whatever the error is, and you probably just spelled something wrong or forgot a semicolon. But if it is giving you an error, just look at the error, and if you can't figure it out, just go back and rewatch the tutorial, because this will definitely compile if you do it correctly. Okay, so we got that created. The next thing we want to do is we want to create the child blueprint version of this actor, because like I said before, this one that we just created on the C++ side for our floating text actor, this is just the parent actor. So we're going to go ahead and create a child version of it. Now, one thing I normally like to do whenever we're using a C++ class only as a parent is in the U class up here, you can actually type the word abstract. And what that does is it tells the engine that this is an abstract class. And an abstract class is basically a class that cannot be created. And so you might be thinking, what's the point of having a class if you can't create it? Well, the point is that you can create instances of children of this class. So we're basically saying that this is a parent class. Don't actually allow them to create an instance of the parent, but any children they have of this class, like the one we're about to create, those can be created. So that's why we're going to do this. It just kind of makes it more obvious to the person who's using your classes which ones are meant to be used and which ones are meant to be only as parent classes. So if we do that, we're going to have to compile again real quick, but it should be pretty fast. And then once this finishes, we can go ahead and start making the blueprint version of this actor. Okay, so again, I'm going to hit Control Space to open up the content browser. And then let's come over here and right click next to our widget, and we'll make a new blueprint class of type. Well, so we need to search for all classes down here because we need to actually find the one we created. So if you search for floating text actor, it should pop up. So this is the one we just created. And you can see it inherits from actor, which inherits from object. So it shows you the hierarchy right here. So we're going to create a child of this. So go ahead and hit select. And we'll call it BP floating text actor. And if we open this guy up, we can now fill it out as we need. So the first thing we want to do here is we want to override that initialize function that we made. So if you look back at the project, if you remember, we added this initialize function and we told it that it is a blueprint implementable event. So if we come back here under overrides, we want to hit this drop down and we want to search for the initialize. So there it will show up. And then inside of here, we just want to save the text value. So if you right click on this, we can just say promote to variable, and that will create a new variable over here on the left and name it text and set it for us, which is exactly what we want to do. The only thing we want to do is select this guy and set it to private just so nobody else has access to it. And then the other thing we want to do inside of here is in the begin play, we want to actually spawn that widget, right? Because this actor is going to spawn above their head, but we want the widget to be part of this actor so that you can actually see the text. So delete these guys. We only really need the begin play here. Just move him down a bit. And so what we want to do is, before we fill this out, is in the viewport tab, just so we can kind of see what's going on. Let's come over here and add a new component. So hit this add button. In Unreal Engine 4, it's also up here, but it's green. And I think it says add component. But we want to add a new widget. So select this guy. And then over here on the right, we need to set some properties about it. So we're actually going to set it to screen, so that's in screen space. For the widget class, we're going to select our floating combat text widget that we just created. And then we're also going to select draw at desired size, so that way it actually draws at the size of whatever the widget happens to be. And then I think that's all we need to do. Oops, I didn't mean to hit find. Compile, save. Now you'll notice that you can't actually see it. And that's just because Unreal Engine doesn't draw scene space widgets in this viewport. But if you were to switch this to world, you would see that it's showing this 100 here. But again, we don't want it to be in world, we want it to be in screen. But if you want to just switch it to world to make sure everything's working, you should see it. But make sure you set it back to screen before we continue. All right, so if we go to the event graph now, we basically want to set this 100 little widget over here to show whatever text they pass in here. So to do that, we'll drag in our widget, and we need to say get user widget object, because currently a widget, if you hover over it, it's just a widget component. It doesn't know that it's containing our floating text widget. So to get the floating text widget, we need to do this, and then we need to cast it to that. So we'll say cast to floating combat text widget. And so now we have a reference to our widget, which is this guy. Now we have a reference to this guy. And we want to, first of all, bind to that event dispatcher for when the animation finishes. Because if you remember in our widget, we made an event dispatcher. We go to the graph tab. Over here, we made an event dispatcher called anim_finished, and this gets called whenever the animation finishes, so whenever the text fades out. So we can drag off this and say bind to anim_finished, and make sure you get the right one here. The right one here, because there's actually this one's actually an Unreal Engine one. We actually want this one, this bind event to anim_finished. So make sure you get this one. It should pop up and look like this. And then we can drag off this guy again and say create event. And then it's going to want us to fill in a function here. We'll do that in a second, but we'll come back to that in a second here. The last thing we want to do in this begin play is we want to initialize this widget, because if you remember over here, we also made an initialize function, or sorry, we also made an initialize function, which takes in the text. So we need to call that real quick. We'll make a little reroute node here by double clicking, and then drag off of this and say initialize, and you should see it pop up here. And then it will take in the text. So, and then we have the text from down here when it was initialized. So we'll just drag in our text and say get and hook that up. Okay, so the last thing we need to do real quick is we need to fill in this guy. So again, we'll just say go ahead and create a matching function for us. And we'll create one, and then we can rename this. So F2 and call it handle anim finished. And then we'll make this private as well, just because nobody else needs access to it. And then inside of here, what we want to do is we actually want to destroy this widget, or sorry, destroy this actor, because whenever the widget finishes fading out and it finishes its animation, we just want to go ahead and delete it because we can't see it anymore anyway, so there's no point of keeping it around. So we'll just say destroy widget, or sorry, destroy actor. and this will destroy the whole actor. So we'll just add a little comment here and say destroy the actor when the animation finishes. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty straightforward. We're just saying when the animation finishes, go ahead and destroy it. And then I think that's all we need to do here for this guy. So there might be a way we can easily test this, just so we can see what's going on. But we still need to do a lot more to get this fully working. But we might just be able to test. I just want to see if we can get this guy to show up at all, just so we can see what's going on. So we go to our third-person character real quick. So let's actually come back here to this guy. Let's just try this as a test. Let's just right-click and say create, or I guess, yeah, spawn actor from class is what we actually want. Let's just try to spawn this guy real quick. So the class we're going to spawn is our BP floating text actor. The spawn transform, so we want to spawn it at the location of, let's see, of our self. Yeah, this is going to be a little bit weird, but I just want to try to show you guys what it looks like. So we'll just say get actor location. Sorry, I did that really quick. But if you right click on these guys, you can split them. That's all I did. I right clicked and I said split. Let's just see if this works. I know this probably doesn't make a lot of sense. I just want to try to show this thing and get it popping up before we actually go ahead and write the code to do it properly. So come over here and we hit this guy. Maybe it's not going to work. Why is it not working? Ah, right, probably because we didn't actually initialize it. So let's just add a default value to the text. So go back to the floating text actor. We'll just default this guy to like 100 just so we can see it. And then hopefully it should work now. So if we press play, it's not going to be quite correct yet because we're just kind of doing it only on the server. So if we come over here and we press our E button, so if you look on the left screen, you can see the 100 is actually popping up. It's not stacking correctly because we haven't done that, but you can at least see it's popping up and then it's moving up and then it's fading out nicely. And if you were to do it on this screen, it still only happens on the server because we haven't actually done the network part of it yet. But I just wanted to show you guys, or at least get it popping up so you can make sure you're on the right track and that it looks the same as mine does before we go any further. Okay, so let's go back here and just remove this because this isn't actually what we want to do here. So the next thing we're going to do in the part 3 is we're going to create a component and we're going to attach it to our character. And that component is going to handle all the logic for the replication and making sure that the text stacks correctly and all that good stuff. So we'll do that in part 3. So I'll see you guys in the next video.